Welcome to Disability Warriors. I'm your host, Hannah Rashid, and today I'm joined by two incredible and amazing authors, Rosie Talbot, author of 16 Souls, and Chaz Hayden, author of The First Thing About You. Would you say that there is more disability representation in YA books now compared to when you were in school? So, Rosie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. I was a big reader all through my life, and I've probably forgotten a few, but looking back, I can probably only name one book that I can remember reading as a teenager that had disability representation in. And I don't necessarily know if that book has aged well, and that disability representation was not, as far as I'm aware, authentic or own voices. And I don't know how well it was handled. Now reading the book again as an adult. So I think a lot has changed. I definitely still feel, though, that there really isn't enough disability rep in books out there. And I would love to see more. I would love to see so much more.
And Chaz?
So I sort of feel the same way. I mean, yeah, as a child, there were some books or novels that I think had some representation, but they were either not the main character, they were a side character, or they were probably, it wasn't really a physical disability. Maybe it was like they were sick or something in the hospital, which is still often very relatable for a lot of people. But I think now there's obviously, I sort of agree with Rosie that there's not enough, but I'm also like there's too much. And what I mean is, like, I think that there's not enough authentic disability representation. I think we continue to see like stories being put out, and they're written by authors, that are not disabled. And it just sort of seems like they're slapping a label on a character for no reason. It really doesn't affect the story. If you read it, you're like, if they had the disability or not, the story doesn't change. So it just seems like they said the character was disabled just to say it was. I don't really, in my mind, that's not really inclusivity to me. I'd rather be not represented than represented inauthentically. So that's kind of how I feel about the current status.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, because a lot of the time, I think in the last 2 to 3 years is when I've actually seen decent and good representation being put out there in books, along with the books I've read of yours and a couple others as well. But before that, when I was reading, I would never really see any representation of any type of disability. So it is nice to see more. But of course, authenticity is the main thing when it comes to writing the sort of type of representation.
Yeah, I agree with Chaz. I think no rep is better than bad rep, because it just perpetuates like myths and stereotypes that can be really harmful to the community. So yeah, I agree. Like, there's no point in just peppering in disabled characters where, yeah, if they weren't disabled, nothing would change. The story and their characterization would be exactly the same. Like that doesn't really make sense, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something, like, Rosie, I'm sure you thought about when you were writing your novel, and something I thought about was, like, if you take away the disability, does the story change? And the answer to that has to be yes. Like, it just has to be. And I think that's, I think that's with any sort of marginalized community that's trying to share their stories authentically, sort of these own voices. If you take away that attribute of that character, does the story change? And the answer should be yes. And if it's not, then you're really not sharing, or you're really not sharing the voice of that community.
Of course, yeah. I agree with both your points, and it is definitely something that hopefully as the years progress is going to get better, because I think a lot of sources of media are including more disabled characters, and obviously adding them into the plot where it's more important. If you didn't have that character there, it wouldn't really be the full story that you need and that you have. So I really hope that improves as we progress and get more literature in the world where there are characters of disability in them. Welcome to today's episode of Disability Warriors. I'm joined by Luz Zodi, a wonderful coach at Neuroqueer. So as someone who has ADHD yourself and coaches people with ADHD and autism, what's the number one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just been diagnosed with ADHD or autism?
So hard to pick one thing. So I think I would start with find community wherever you can find it. And if that sounds scary and if that sounds like a big ask, a lot of neurodivergent and particularly queer neurodivergent people find that we have already sort of found each other. So I would just look to your friend groups first. And there's this sort of like phenomenon in neurodivergent friend groups where one person gets diagnosed or self-diagnosis, they figure it out. And then it's like this domino effect through the friend group where everyone else is like, wait a minute, that's ADHD, that's autism. I thought I was just weird. I've always gotten this feedback. And yeah. So it moves through the friend group and everybody ends up figuring out something or multiple somethings about themselves. So find that community and you might already have it. The other part though, I'll give you two, not just one,
That's okay.
is consider your identities and intersectionality, because our brains and our nervous system are processing everything around us all the time, and how you move through the world, how you have to move through the world based on who you are, is a big part of that. And so if you're queer, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're disabled, even more so if you are like visibly disabled and it's something that people perceive about you, you're going to have a much different experience than like a cis white man. You're going to have a much different experience from like a queer person has a much different experience from a cis het person. And just being and understanding that you're going to have to integrate your new knowledge of your neurodivergence into that whole sense and into those layers of your identity. That's going to be fun and scary and hard work, but absolutely worth it. And give yourself a break when you feel like your executive function or your emotional regulation are just not cooperating with you, because the reality is there are more things going on in the world that present like real danger for queer people of color, for everybody who's not just like the norm. I'm putting that in quotes. Everybody who's not the default. And your brain is trying to work with that and trying to get you through your workday and trying to do the dishes. And it totally makes sense. If it feels like it's harder for you than everyone else, it is. You're not imagining that.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing you said about finding your people, the friends I have, I mean, a lot of my friends have ADHD and autism, and I know a lot of the time when I'm with them and hanging out, they'll be like, Hannah, you have this, or like, you seem like this, or little things that I do. And it's like, maybe I do. Maybe I have autism or ADHD, but I haven't like checked or anything. And it's good to have that like system of friends who support you and look out for you. And I've always really appreciated that with any friend group I've had. And then like what you said about people who are different in certain ways have to sort of integrate that difference into their everyday life a bit more than other people do. And as someone who's in a wheelchair myself, I feel that constantly. And I know that a lot of the time people don't really understand it. Obviously, if it's a physical disability, they can't really fully understand the concept of it until they've experienced it themselves. So I've had that happen before. Like my mum became ill for a while and has a disability of her own now, and she understands it more than when I was a child. So I understand sort of integrating your life around other people who might not fully understand what you're going through, or might be a bit different as well. So all of those things are really amazing. And yeah, this is really fun to sort of hear all of this and learn more. For more information and content, please subscribe and follow us on our social media. Link below in the description.